Tropical Cyclone Alfred started off life in an unusual way, born in the South Pacific as a triplet, alongside siblings Rae and Seru. Alfred has some other quirks to its name, least of which is that it should have been called Anthony but wasn't allowed to be named after the Prime Minister. So what's so unusual about TC Alfred? Alfred formed with two other cyclones in the South Pacific. While it's not unheard of for three tropical cyclones to form out of the same trough, it is rare, especially in the South Pacific. Tropical Cyclone Rae headed towards Fiji, causing damage to some islands before weakening, while Seru passed by waters off Vanuatu before dissipating. It was very active across the southern hemisphere. It wasn't just what happened in the South Pacific, Professor of Atmospheric Sciences at Monash University Liz Richitayo said. Two cyclones formed around Madagascar, the other end of the South Indian Ocean, so there was actually a lot going on all at once. There's a lot we don't know about tropical cyclones, largely because before the existence of satellites they were difficult to measure and track. Until we got satellites up there, we didn't even know about half of them were out there, Dr. Richitayo said. We understand them pretty well as individual beasts. It's really about when we look at long-term trends, we just don't have those historical records to allow us to do that. How fast is Cyclone Alfred traveling? Most cyclones hit Australia's east coast hard and fast, but Alfred has been taking a different approach, moving slowly parallel to the coast. As of the latest BOM advice from Wednesday afternoon, Cyclone Alfred was moving west-northwest at 16 kilometers per hour. That's allowed it to whip up prolonged and broad-reaching areas of large swell over the last few days. While surfers have been making the most of the waves, it's also led to warnings of significant coastal erosion and flooding for low-lying areas. Nearly 1,000 kilometers of the East Coast is under coastal hazard warnings from the Bureau of Meteorology, from Forster in New South Wales all the way to Sandy Cape, near Bundaberg. Waves of over 10 meters have already impacted the Kari and Rainbow Beach regions of Queensland. Is already producing quite high waves and swell even up onto the Brisbane coast, Dr. Richitayo said. That's probably one of the things that we're going to be looking at is how much coastal erosion damage Alfred does. And that's not something we always see from our landfalling tropical cyclones. Dr. Richitayo said the dramatic waves and swell were unlike other tropical cyclones. Normally, you would see a very concentrated wind field and a fairly fast approach on the land, whereas Alfred's coming down the coast, she said. So it's been coming parallel to the coast, a lot of opportunity to be pushing southerly swell up the coast and onto the coast, even though it itself has been off over ocean. Is it normal for a cyclone to make landfall this far south? Despite northern parts Queensland being well versed in cyclone crossings, it's been over 50 years since a tropical cyclone has made landfall in southeast Queensland or northern New South Wales, and for good reason. Though it's not abnormal for cyclones to reach the latitudes of southeast Queensland, Dr. Richitayo said the prevailing winds through the southern half of Australia tended to push any cyclones born in the South Pacific away from the mainland. So they're more likely to track over New Zealand than they actually are to come in on the Australian coast, she said. Those that do manage to stay near Australia also tend to run into conditions that don't make life easy for a cyclone once they track further south. This includes the relatively cooler waters further south, which weaken the cyclone, and unfavorable winds through the atmosphere which cause a cyclone's tall vertical structure to rip apart. Warm waters over 26.5 degrees Celsius and low vertical wind shear are two of the crucial ingredients needed for a cyclone to form, intensify, and stay alive. A good source of moisture in the atmosphere is also required to sustain a cyclone, something readily available in the tropics at this time of year. Dr. Richitayo said Alfred had managed to find itself in a meteorological sweet spot, where all the ingredients were coming together to keep it alive and close to the coast, with winds causing it to take a U-turn back toward the mainland. She said this in itself made Alfred an unusual cyclone. Though she noted Australia does see a lot of unusual cyclones if you look closely. How does climate change affect tropical cyclones? While climate change is supercharging the ferocity of cyclones, the impact isn't as clear-cut as other natural disasters like fire and floods. What scientists do know is that a warmer, wetter, and more energetic atmosphere is giving cyclones more destructive power. They are also moving. Observations have shown both where cyclones form as well as where they reach their maximum intensity has been moving away from the equator in recent decades. Dr. Richie Tayo said a lot of what we do know is from research conducted in the Northern Hemisphere. There are suggestions that what we call the tropical belt will extend further south, and that means potentially the atmospheric circulation that tropical cyclones like to exist under will also extend further south as well, she said. But once again, there's a lot of uncertainty in the Southern Hemisphere in particular. We don't really have a lot of good answers. As ocean temperatures warm up, the conditions needed for cyclones to hit further south increase, with a temperature of 26.5 C required. We have a very sharp ocean temperature gradient. That tends to mean that once cyclones move far enough south, they weaken pretty quickly, Dr. Richie Tayo said. As temperatures warm up, that does mean there may be better conditions for cyclones to make it further south. They do seem to be tracking further south already and making it further south. But there could be other factors at play. It could be because the conditions are actually more conducive to them, living that long and being able to move further south, Dr. Richie Tayo said. It could just mean that we are tracking them for longer. Our records make it a little bit difficult for us to be completely sure why that might be.